Thank you, Puan, for the introduction. I'll just share my screen real quick. Okay. Right. So hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you again, Puan, for the introduction and for inviting us to present our work. So also with us today are the supervisors of this project, Dr. Amy Then from Universiti Malaya, and Dr. Adam Lim, I think he's here as well, from Seahorses Malaysia. Our local collaborators, Mr. Muhammad Ali and Dr. Fatiha from UMS, as well as two of our research assistants, Chin and Noor Asliana. So today I'll be sharing more about our research titled Seahorses, Traditional Medicine, Cultural Values and Trade in Sabah that we had conducted and what we had found over the course of the 2 months. So before we get into what the project is about, I'll just quickly provide an overview of the topic. So seahorses of the genus Hippocampus are bony fishes from the family Syngnathidae. Currently, there are 46 described species in the world, and 12 of the species have been recorded in Malaysian waters. And seahorses are valuable and known for a few of their importance, especially ecologically, medicinally, economically, and culturally. And they were also one of the first marine fish species of commercial importance to be listed on the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora CITES, where all known seahorse species were listed on Appendix 2. And also under the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species, 8 out of the 12 species in Malaysia are listed as vulnerable, 3 species as data deficient, and 1 of the species as least concern. So if we looked at what seahorses are normally used for and traded for, the majority of seahorses are exported in dried forms for traditional medicine and curio or alive for the aquarium trade. Like in Malaysia, the majority of the traded seahorses were usually sold for use in traditional Chinese medicine, TCM, either domestically or in other Asian markets. So about, for example, 1 kilogram of dried seahorses can be sold for around up to 3,000 ringgit. And the seahorses that are sold in Malaysia, if imported, they would usually be imported from a few countries like mainland China, Hong Kong, Japan, Indonesia, Thailand, the Philippines, and Singapore. But aside from the dried forms of seahorses, capsules containing extracts of seahorses had also been quite prominent in Malaysia. So in terms of the medicinal usages, the Chinese community uses seahorses as a cure for a few different health benefits. For example, for asthma, for skin conditions, heatiness, joint and stomach aches, blood cleansing, strengthening of the kidney, and also as an aphrodisiac. The Malay fishing communities consume seahorses to obtain similar health benefits, and they also believe that seahorses can protect them against evil spirits. So more of like spiritual side of the purpose. However, the potential use of seahorses, for instance, in the indigenous community in Sabah, have yet to be discovered today. Besides that, dried seahorses are also used as curio or souvenirs. But on the other hand, we also have live seahorses that are usually kept as pets. And the live seahorse trade in Malaysia depends completely on imports into the country. But although the exporting of live seahorses is illegal in Malaysia, they are usually, there's still minor exports of live seahorses going on illegally. So if we looked at the top diagram here, it shows how trout fisheries operate. So where large nets are dragged along the seabed, so catching shrimps and everything else in their path. So any kind of marine mammals, marine animals that are living in the area where this is happening often gets caught by trawlers, not just seahorses. So this is a dominant fishing method, resulting in the loss of seahorse bycatch or incidental catch. And seahorses being demersal, slow swimming, having low density, low fecundity, mate and site fidelity, as well as obligate parental care. They are particularly vulnerable to capture in trawls like this, resulting in decreased population resilience due to fishing mortality. Heavy exploitation by bottom trawling is not only a threat to seahorses, but this destructive fishing method also impacts the seabed habitats that seahorses rely on. Plus, fishers in Malaysia had also reported declines in seahorse bycatch volumes, and the decreased catches could suggest that seahorse populations in these areas are declining, possibly due to overfishing or habitat degradation. So consequently, there has been a growing concern for the global status of seahorse populations in Malaysia and a need for conservation measures for seahorses. However, limited landings data are available locally. So most of the dried seahorses in Malaysia were landed as bycatch, primarily by large-scale trawlers, which accounts for the largest source of seahorses in international wildlife trade. And the bycatch levels vary depending on the type of fishing gear used. However, there are still trawlers and divers who actually directly target seahorses in small scale by focusing their fishing efforts in particular seahorse habitats. So in Malaysia, seahorses are usually caught incidentally by trawlers off the coast of Peninsular Malaysia, Sabah, Sarawak, as well as Labuan. However, the current extent of the impact of trawled fisheries on seahorses in Sabah has not been sufficiently documented. So seahorses are a species of great concern as they are heavily traded for use in traditional medicine as curio or aquarium fishes, especially in Southeast Asia, including Malaysia. For example, about 5 million of dried seahorses were exported from the Asian region annually on average. And Malaysia is also among the 32 countries that collectively traded of up to 45,000 kgs annually of dried seahorses in countries like China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Singapore. But despite the zero seahorse export being declared in Malaysia since 2014, Traffic, the organization, recently reported that Malaysia is one of the top 5 countries who contributed to the total global exports of dried seahorses between 2008 to 2018. Additionally, Malaysians reportedly consume traditional Chinese medicine that contained approximately 3,000 kilograms of dried seahorses, which is equivalent to almost 1 million seahorses back in 1998. Besides Peninsular Malaysia, seahorses in Sabah are commonly exported to Hong Kong and imported from other countries, such as the Philippines, through illicit and rarely discussed trade routes. And in Sabah, seahorses are openly sold and quite highly valued. Therefore, a clear understanding on the cultural context of seahorse usages is important to inform effective and culturally relevant conservation and intervention measures, but little had been done on this cultural aspect in Sabah. The last seahorse trade in Sabah in Peninsular Malaysia was actually conducted 2 decades ago, and there was another study that was conducted in Sabah in 2015. Therefore, recent seahorse trade information is needed to ascertain the current extent of seahorse exploitation, both locally and internationally. And as a country under the Appendix 2 seahorse listing of CITES, Malaysia is required to ensure that its international trade does not threaten wild populations. However, this still remains a challenge due to the lack of knowledge on seahorse fisheries and trade. So by acquiring current information about the local knowledge, cultural uses, and seahorse trade, this could really assist Malaysia, including Sabah, to meet obligations under CITES by providing valuable advice on the best way to implement the listing, and thus hopefully promote sustainable seahorse trade. And findings from this study could also demonstrate the need to reinforce existing seahorse trade regulations locally and internationally, and get seahorses to be at least partially protected in Malaysia. So therefore, the objectives of this study were firstly to determine the local supply, sales volume, value of seahorses, seahorse trait diversity, size, and source of traded seahorses in the Malaysian traditional medicine trade. Secondly, we looked at to characterize patterns of consumption usage of seahorses and underlying motivation, including cultural beliefs among traditional medicine practitioners and fishers of different ethnic groups. And we also looked to determine the degree of non-consumption usage of seahorses and awareness level of seahorse threats among traditional medicine practitioners and fishers of different ethnic groups as well. So in this study, 2 different sets of survey questionnaires were prepared with the focus on seahorse trade and seahorse fisheries, knowledge and perception of the use of seahorses, and the awareness level of seahorse threats for 2 key respondent groups, namely the traditional medicine practitioners or traders, as well as fishers. So the fisher questionnaires were adapted from literature reviews related to the use of seahorses, seahorse catch, and trade in English and PM, with the guidance of a few field experts. The questionnaires had also been tested and refined with small test groups prior to obtaining an ethics permit from the Universiti of Malaya Research Ethics Committee and access license from SaBC. So the surveys were conducted over 2 months at traditional medicine shops and fishing jetties or villages across a total of 6 districts in Sabah, namely Kota Kinabalu, Kota Marudu, Pitas, Kudat, Sandakan, and Tawau. The traditional medicine and fisher surveys were conducted through semi-structured interviews, and both of these respondent groups were located through a combination of haphazard sampling and snowball sampling, in which new respondents were referred to by initial contacts. And so these techniques were adopted to maintain randomness when recruiting interview respondents and to reach out to respondents who were more difficult to locate. The traditional medicine survey were conducted to record how many practitioners were selling seahorses, used to sell and have never sold, to determine the prevalence of the trade. And then we also looked at the current and historical supply volume, sales volume, selling price of dried seahorses that were recorded on average, and we standardized to annual quantities. We also looked at the diversity of seahorse species, the size, and the source of traded seahorses that were further summarized in percentages. And the fisher survey was carried out to record seahorse catch, fishing gears used, to summarize the percentage of fishers that had caught seahorses and have never caught them. And they were further summarized based on gear types that they had used. The number, frequency of catch, as well as the frequency of fishes out at sea were also recorded. And from that, the annual seahorse bycatch volumes were calculated. Perception of underlying motivation to consume seahorses, consumption usage, non-consumption usage, and the awareness level of seahorse threats among fishers were also determined and summarized. So from the traditional medicine survey, we found that out of the 31 TCM practitioners or traders interviewed, only 32.3% of respondents were still selling dried seahorses. And out of the 8 traditional medicine practitioners of other minority ethnic groups, 87.5% of them were still selling dried seahorses. The species of dried seahorses that were most common in trade for TCM and the other traditional medicine were Hippocampus barbari, followed by Hippocampus phainosissimus, Hippocampus trimaculatus, Hippocampus klogi, and Hippocampus kuda. But no information were shared on the dried seahorse species that were historically sold. In terms of size, all dried seahorses that were being sold were small size of less than or equals to 13 centimeters, while those that were historically sold were of medium size of 14 to 20 centimeters. So here we looked at the supply volume, sales volume, and selling price of dried seahorses. So if we looked at this figure right here, out of the 17 traditional medicine practitioners or traders interviewed who were currently selling dried seahorses, 9 of them reported an average supply volume of about 1.2 kilograms per year. The remaining 8 respondents who were selling dried seahorses were unsure of the supply volume of their dried seahorses, mainly due to 2 reasons, irregularity in supply and the lack of consumer demand. Over here, 6 of the traditional medicine practitioners or traders interviewed who were currently selling dried seahorses as well, indicated an average sales volume of more than 300 grams per year, which was considered low. And then we have the 11 other respondents who were selling dried seahorses were unsure of the sales volume, also due to similar reasons, irregularity in sales and the lack of consumer demand. And some of them have not even had any dried seahorse sales for up to 4 years now. So with limited information, no comparisons could be made with historical supply volume and sales volume. And then we looked at the selling price of dried seahorses, and 16 respondents who were currently selling dried seahorses reported an average price of more than 5,000 ringgit per kilogram, which was lower than the average price of historically sold dried seahorses. But we expected the price to increase from previous years. So this could be due to the limited information on price of historically traded seahorses, because only 2 respondents shared this information. And these prices also, according to traditional medicine practitioners, these prices also varied depending on seahorse size and color. For instance, some respondents sell bigger seahorses at a higher price than smaller ones, and lighter colored seahorses at a higher price than darker colored ones. So when it comes to sourcing dried seahorses, most of the practitioners or traders interviewed had sourced their dried seahorses locally from Malaysia, including Peninsula Malaysia, Sabah, and Labuan. In addition to Malaysian caught seahorses, some of the traditional medicine shops were also selling imported ones from China and the Philippines. The rest of the practitioners or traders had either obtained their dried seahorses from both locally and internationally, countries like Taiwan and the Philippines, or they were uncertain about the source of their dried seahorses. And the dried seahorses that were historically traded were sourced locally and mainly imported from the Philippines. So in the fishes survey, a total of 308 fishes were interviewed, and the responses gathered were mainly dominated by fishes who used gill or drift nets as their main gears. So majority of the fishes interviewed had also previously caught seahorses, and only 4.6% of respondents specifically targeted them. So the rest were caught as bycatch. So based on the figure, these are the gears that reported catching seahorses. And if we looked at the percentage proportionate to the sample sizes along the right-hand side of the figure, gill or drift nets catch most of the seahorses, followed by trawl nets. And the total estimated annual seahorse catch that we looked at by gill or drift nets was found to be higher than the total estimated annual trawl catch of seahorses in Sabah. And 65.3% of fishers interviewed actually perceived the number of seahorses to have declined compared to when they started fishing. Looking at the consumption of seahorses, only 1.3% of respondents reported consuming seahorses, mainly for health maintenance and disease treatment. And the three indigenous respondents used seahorses for internal treatment of diseases such as to treat asthma, breathlessness, fever, headaches, and kidney disorders. Besides that, we had an Indonesian respondent who also consumed seahorses for general well-being to strengthen the body. Here, only 28.2% of respondents use seahorses for non-consumption purposes. The indigenous respondents commonly use seahorses as curio or souvenirs to protect them against evil spirits, to bring good luck, and to put a spell on someone, to keep the house cool, and to keep them as pets in aquariums. And respondents from other minority ethnic groups also reported using seahorses for similar uses, such as to keep them as curio or souvenirs, to protect against evil spirits, and to bring good luck. And then we looked at the awareness level of seahorse threats. Out of the 4 threats, bycatch was considered as a minor threat by most respondents, followed by overfishing, ocean plastic pollution, and habitat destruction. Also, the awareness level of overfishing and bycatch was quite varied across respondents. So to summarize our results, seahorse trade in Sabah was only reported among TCM practitioners or traders and traders of other minority ethnic groups. And the current supply and sales volume were considered low, with generally high prices. And then we also had a total of 5 different species that were found to be traded, Hippocampus barbari being the most common, with mostly small-sized seahorses that were sourced locally. In terms of seahorse fisheries, seahorses were mostly caught as bycatch by gill or drift nets. And only a small minority of respondents reported using seahorses for consumption and non-consumption purposes. And some uses were more common in certain ethnic groups than others, indicating cultural specific uses, although quite limited. In terms of the seahorse threats, bycatch being one of the main threats towards seahorses was instead recognized as a minor threat by most respondents. So in conclusion, reportedly low demand of dried seahorses is a promising finding. However, almost half of the TCM practitioners or traders and most of the other traders were selling dried seahorses, which shows that there is still considerable demand of dried seahorses for traditional medicine trade. And so there is a need to focus on implementing and enforcing seahorse trade regulations for traditional medicine to ensure the sustainability of seahorse trade in Sabah. And gill or drift nets being the most dominant fishing gears for seahorse bycatch suggest the need to better manage small-scale fisheries in addition to large-scale trawlers. And due to time constraint, insights into cultural uses by indigenous communities is limited, therefore providing opportunity for future studies. So before I end, I would just like to thank you parties who have made this today, the Rufford Foundation, Dr. Amy, Dr. Adam, Mr. Ali, and Dr. Fatiha for your support throughout the project, as well as Chin and Nur Azliana for your incredible assistance in fieldwork. And of course, last but not least, we are very grateful to SaBC for your support, especially Nur Aizat and Encik Azhan, whom we had worked closely with throughout the process of preparing the necessary documents, including the PICs from the relevant bodies to obtain a permit for the study. Yeah, so with that, thank you very much, everyone,